on the quiet side until we give you the go. The first thing we're going to do here is we will start our recording, and then no need to do anything until then the second step will be to go live on Facebook. So this is all just background behind the scenes. Sit back, relax, and we got this.
Talk amongst yourselves.
Recording in progress.
Yes, thank you so much.
Oh, we are recording now. Okay, hi.
Yes, so we'll be doing now the Facebook Live section, and then that'll be another moment. Thank you for your patience. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. We are thrilled to have you for our special program for World Vegan Month. My name is Lisa Levinson, and I'm the Campaigns Director for In Defense of Animals. And I'm here with some of my colleagues today. We've got Mary Easonsey, who's with our development team. Hey, Mary.
Hi, everybody.
And we have Lia Wilbourn, our farmed animals campaigner, who is going to introduce our special guest speaker today. Hi, Lia.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Lisa. And we have, now I'm going to read her fabulous bio a little bit later, but hi, Crystal, Dr. Crystal Heath.
Good to see you.
All right. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about what In Defense of Animals has been doing, and also in regards to a lot of what Crystal has been working on. So I'm just in such, let me just say right off the bat, this woman is just an activist that I've long admired and am inspired by for her guts and her courage. And we will get into that and her background and all the things that she's been doing. So first of all, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm just going to go over some things that IDA has been working on that's very much related to the work of our honor and Dr. Crystal Heath. So veterinarians and advocates for animals and humans and the planet speak out on bird flu, cruelty, mass killings, and corruption with Dr. Crystal Heath, founder of OurHonor.org, a veterinary advocacy organization. So this was right around when I started with IDA, but back in March of 2024, of course, the bird flu epidemic had been getting worse and worse. There was a convention in San Francisco at the Marriott Hotel, the Animal Ag Tech Summit. And a bunch of us showed up and decided to try to attend this conference and get inside and hear what was being discussed. It was open, the doors were open. We went in there very professional, and just were ready to ask some very pointed questions. And nobody was letting really the public speak. And so eventually we had to get louder, and we knew we were going to get kicked out because this was the subject we were bringing up that they didn't want to really discuss, which is bird flu and ventilation shutdown, which we will show you more about that in a moment. The horrific default now for mass killing animals due to bird flu. So that right there on the bottom to the right, that was finally me having to hold up a sign and just say, stop the bird flu bailouts, fund a plant-based food system, a slaughter-free food system, and some of my colleagues there. Then in June of 2024, we went to Sacramento. We joined with some other advocates and members of the Sacramento Vegan Society, including the amazing, on the right there in pink, that is Linda Middlesworth, who I think Crystal has met also and talked to, but she is otherwise known as the Vegan Mentor. And at this convention, we weren't able to get in. It was not open to the public, and you had to pay and sign up way far in advance. And the tickets were, you know, just we weren't willing to pay. And so we went and we tried to see if we could talk to anybody, and nobody was really talking to us. So again, we had to get louder. And Linda just, as the doors opened and all of the people came out, the speakers were nowhere to be seen, but we just started also getting that same message across, that about the subsidies, and asking these pointed questions about why is animal ag continuing to bail out the dairy industry, the egg industry, the chicken and meat industry, while putting us all at risk for another pandemic and also mass killing animals. So we've done a few alerts around these themes. The dairy industry must comply with bird flu testing to prevent a pandemic. Things were just getting out of hand, and the former CDC director had stated that a pandemic from bird flu is inevitable. That was Dr. Redfield. And then, wouldn't you know it, the next month, at the California Farm Bureau, there was a big meeting of the Cattle Health Task Force. And then also the lead veterinarian of California was there, and that was open to the public. So some of us also went there, and we had planned about 4 different talking points. Each of us wanted to just simply ask some questions, and we waited very politely, professionally for a few hours, and then bird flu was brought up, and they were just kind of glossing over the subject. And my talking point was just kind of saying, is this our plan? Are you going to just keep continuing to use ventilation shutdown? And I had to spell out what it is and the cruelty of it, and just asked, what is their plan how are they going to keep doing this? They keep continuing business as usual, and nothing's changing. And this industry, especially the dairy industry, keeps getting bailed out. And at that meeting, we found out that over half the dairy herds at that time in California were under quarantine. And then they didn't want to hear it and actually ignored my question. And then, one of the executives stormed out and basically said what I was saying was BS. And then some of us just had to get louder to make our point. And then we did another alert. At that point, Elon Musk was in charge of the Department of Government Efficiency, the new Trump program department that he created when he came back into office. And the irony is it's supposedly to cut mass waste in government. And yet our point, of course, is we'll then cut the exorbitant subsidies that are going to this most destructive and cruel industry. And our taxpayer dollars are funding animal cruelty, environmental devastation, the threat of future pandemics. And the Stanford report came out with a study that 800 times more subsidies go to animal ag than to animal-free and plant-based alternatives. And we've also done alerts around the theme of future farmers of America and just the indoctrination and conditioning that happens to youth even, and in these programs. And I'd love to hear from Crystal maybe on this, because she was also in 4-H, I believe, or Future Farmers of America. She can talk about that. But we did 2 alerts. One, this goat on the left, that's Cedar the goat. This made headlines over a year ago. A young girl who was in a Future Farmers of America program had a change of heart and did not want to send her friend that she bonded with and was taught to raise to send to a contest for prizes and then send off to slaughter. She didn't want to do it. And her mother said, okay, honey, you're right. And they simply wanted to take Cedar out of the competition. And this became a huge, huge big deal. And Animal Ag basically said, no, we have to make an example of this. We can't allow even one person to just take out their animal because they feel sorry for their animal. And so the authorities came down, they took the goat away from this crying girl, and they sent the goat, and the goat was slaughtered. And then we did another alert to expose birthing shows at state fairs, just another aspect to Future Farmers of America. These state fairs in general help to promote animal ag, and the idea that everything is fine and dandy here, and look how well we treat our animals. And they actually forcibly impregnate these mothers on schedule so that when they arrive at the fair, they then induce them to give birth. This is called the Miracle of Birth Center at the Minnesota State Fair. The babies are taken from the mothers in front of spectators. It's seen as entertainment, and the mothers taken from the babies, and all these animals are eventually slaughtered too. Then we had another alert, government response to bird flu is inadequate to prevent a pandemic. And that is a photo that Crystal took herself. She's taken it upon herself to go and document what's really going on, like in the Central Valley, and the dairy herds who have been infected with bird flu, and some of them dying. I figure she'll probably talk about that. But then the next month, the USDA allocated an extra $1 billion to the poultry industry amid bird flu and the spikes in egg prices. And yet it's a virus driven by animal farming itself. So because November is World Vegan Month, we got to have 2 of these webinars this month. Last month we had Dr. Silas Rao. Today we have Crystal Heath. And just a reminder that we have our ongoing support group every Thursday, once a month on a Thursday. That's with Lisa Levinson, but this month it's going to be on Thanksgiving Day. And then we have our Vegan Mentor Support Group, which is the second Monday of each month at 4 p.m. Pacific time. And we have our alert now that we collaborated with Crystal Heath and Our Honor on to urge the American Veterinary Medical Association to reject ventilation shutdown and the mass killing of animals. She'll be getting into that too. We also have another alert that happened right after that that's gone out to target the Centers for Disease Control as well on the pandemic threats that heighten as bird flu spreads, and the subsidies are driving the risk. So, okay, lastly, before I introduce Dr. Crystal Heath, this was a video that went with the alert that we collaborated on. And this video, in large part, also thank you to Animal Outlook. They were able to get this footage from an experiment that was done to test out ventilation shutdown. And so this is just a little video that goes with the alert, but a little warning, it's upsetting, but this is the truth that has to get out there, which is why we put it together for you. Okay, thank you everyone for attending and for your support. And now I am going to introduce Dr. Crystal Heath. She is a Los Angeles-based shelter veterinarian and the executive director of Our Honor, a nonprofit that supports veterinary students, veterinarians, and other animal professionals in speaking their conscience to create more ethical systems that consider the best interest of all species. She is also on the board of LEAP, Leaders for Ethics, Animals, and the Planet, known as the Humane Alternative to 4-H and Future Farmers of America, which aims to transform today's youth into the humane, truly humane leaders of tomorrow who advocate for and work towards an equitable future for all living beings on the planet. Dr. Heath is also on the founding committee of Veterinarians Against Ventilation Shutdown. She was named one of Vox's 2023 Future Perfect 50, which honors the scientists, thinkers, scholars, writers, and activists working on solutions to today's and tomorrow's biggest problems. Thank you to one of my biggest inspirations, and please welcome Dr. Crystal Heath.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm just going to share my screen here.
Great.
Pull up my presentation. Let's see, share. And thank you for that lovely introduction.
My pleasure.
Right. So yes, I am a shelter veterinarian, but I also am an advocate for farmed animal protection. And before I became an activist, I grew up in rural Northern California, and I was the vice president of my 4-H club. I raised goats and chickens and horses and dogs. And I discovered, though, that if I were to breed my dairy goats, I grew up on unpasteurized goat's milk, and that's what we drank. We drank the milk from our goats. We didn't even pasteurize it. I do not recommend that nowadays at all, but that's what I did. And cow's milk tasted weird to me. But once I got involved in 4-H, I had my own baby goats that I was caring for. And then I learned if I bred her, if she had a boy, I would have to sell the boy to slaughter. I decided I wasn't going to do that. Gradually, I'm a twin sister as well. And me and my sister, we kind of got more involved in animal advocacy. Animals were our first friends. We loved them. And kind of got more involved in animal advocacy, eventually became conscientious objectors to the consumption of animal protein. And yeah, now I'm on the board of LEAP, which is the alternative to 4-H. I think it's really vital that kids nowadays learn how to care for farmed animals, but do it in a way that is in alignment with One Health, which is the idea that humans, animals, and the environment and plant, we're all interconnected. But we desperately need more, the next generation of people to understand how to properly care for the farmed animals that we will be taking care of, even if they aren't used in protein production. But one thing I did learn when I was in 4-H was responsibility. We have a responsibility to care for the animals in our care. And when we take on an animal, we have an obligation to provide them with food, water, shelter, and a quick and painless death when the time comes in veterinary care. But nowadays, industrial facilities have gotten so big, they never put plans in place for what would happen in an emergency and how to end the lives of those animals if there was a massive infectious disease outbreak or emergency situation, in a way that is, less cruel than what we are doing now, which is what I'll talk about. So headlines right now are all about the price of turkey. It's risen by 40%. Why is that? They're blaming, of course, the avian influenza outbreak, but also labor shortages, crop prices, all of these things. But what's not being talked about in all of those headlines is the details into avian influenza. This is an unprecedented animal welfare crisis. This is the worst outbreak in history, unprecedented number of species affected in so many countries around the world. This is a screenshot. In 30 days, 3.7 million birds were exterminated to stop the spread. You can go onto the USDA APHIS website and see the most recent outbreaks and how many birds were exterminated. And under the USDA's current stamping out policy, if there's an infection, an outbreak of maybe just a few birds get infected, all of the birds at that premise have to be depopulated. And unfortunately, I don't know of a better way to do this. There's been some research into maybe sort of a, a streamlined depopulation where only not all of the birds are depopulated and maybe just some are saved. But right now, with the way that it's structured in the United States, all of the birds have to be exterminated to, in theory, stop the spread of the virus. And the turkey industry, especially, has been massively consolidated to mostly, most turkeys come from these three companies, Jennie-O, Butterball, and Cargill. And this consolidation has led to a very fragile food system that we're currently living under. And many of these turkey facilities are located right under major migratory flyways. Uh, Minnesota, Indiana, Illinois, these are the major turkey producing states. And we already saw this footage. I won't play it again, but how are we killing these animals? The most common way in very large facilities is using ventilation shutdown by sealing up buildings, pumping in heat, and waiting for the animals inside to die. Sometimes it can take up to 8 hours. It's pretty horrifying, especially when there are alternatives. The alternative, the less cruel method that I advocate for is using high expansion nitrogen foam or nitrogen gas. And these animals, they become unconscious within just a few seconds and die a few minutes later. In many ways, it's even less cruel than the way we slaughter animals today. And this is something we have known avian influenza has been a problem since 2015. And the fact that it's 10 years later and we haven't made this mandatory in all of these big facilities is just a severe, is neglectful by the industry. So this is a spreadsheet of all of the alternative methods available. And you might ask, well, if there's all these better ways, is this just more expensive? Why are we doing this? And it is just the simple, easy way to do it. All it takes is a couple of heaters, sealing up the buildings and doing this. And we just got used to doing it this way. And because mostly the American Veterinary Medical Association worked in conjunction with the USDA to create these guidelines for depopulation, and they allowed ventilation shutdown to be used in constrained circumstances. And they didn't dictate what constrained circumstances meant. So the industry's failure to put plans in place to use less cruel methods ended up being the constrained circumstance necessary to allow this method to take place. And unfortunately, people in AVMA leadership viewed any criticism of this practice as who are harming the profession and harming our colleagues who were doing this difficult work of depopulating these animals. This is work that had to be done, but any criticism of the methods was viewed as an attack on our colleagues. And so these conversations just weren't really allowed to be had, and they were shut down. And a lot of my colleagues, not knowing any better, just deferred to, like, well, I trust my colleagues working in food animal medicine. This must be the only option for them. And they also were led to believe that if we took away ventilation shutdown, if the AVMA reclassified it as not recommended, then there was nothing else that they could do. And that their hands would be tied, and that would lead to even worse animal welfare outcomes. More birds would get sick with avian influenza. So we really didn't look at this rationally, and the PR machine of the industry was so good that they really just batted down any criticism of these practices. So how did this come about? It was a $36,000 grant from the USDA to the AVMA to create these guidelines for the depopulation of animals. And these guidelines mean that when producers use methods that are in these guidelines for exterminating their birds, they will get USDA indemnity payments for the loss of their birds. So we taxpayer dollars pay them, whether we buy their products or not. We are forced to pay these companies who kill their birds with ventilation shutdown, because that's the USDA policies. Any method used that's in the AVMA guidelines, they will be reimbursed for. And there's also the issue of the industry knew that ventilation shutdown was not really in alignment with animal cruelty laws. Obviously, like in Minnesota, there's a law that you cannot house a farmed animal in a building without fresh circulating air. That's against the law. But now that it's in the guidelines, potentially they're less vulnerable to animal cruelty violations. So this is a FOIA document, a FOIA email that we got that says, I did suggest our state execs study animal cruelty laws to determine if there would be liability to prosecution if they practice VSD or even mass euthanasia. This was in response to the killing of pigs during the COVID-19 outbreak. They were worried that they would be prosecuted for doing this. So they mass exterminated these pigs because of the slaughterhouse bottleneck that occurred, because many workers were sick. There weren't enough shackles on the slaughter lines for these pigs to go to, and there was overcrowding. They were starving the pigs to try to decrease the space and the weight, and then they ultimately decided that it would be best to end their lives, and they did so. Hundreds of thousands of pigs, potentially millions of pigs, using ventilation shutdown. This is another email I got, and this is them doing their PR spin to try to legitimize ventilation shutdown during this time. And this is in response to the AVMA's statement about it. And this is Harry Snelson, who's the executive director of the American Association of Swine Veterinarians. And he says in response to the AVMA statement, I agree it's wordy, but it's supportive of the situation. And I agree, coming from the AVMA, it's going to take a veterinary perspective rather than a producer perspective. And I think that's what you want for producers. It will provide the professional support for what they're likely going to have to do. And this has been the case. The industry relies on veterinarians going along with what they say in order to legitimize their practices. And because veterinarians have lent our legitimacy to this, animal welfare on farms has gotten so much worse. It's veterinarians who legitimize practices like gestation crates, practices like pig slaughterhouse gas chambers, and now ventilation shutdown plus. Oop, my slide isn't turning. Let me see what I can do here. My thing's frozen. Oh, there we go. Okay. Oh no. I'm going to try this again. I'm going to stop my share and try to share it again. Let's see. Oh, I think it's because my screen closed down.
No prob, it happens.
Just pull this up again.
There's no rush.
All right. Share. Nope. Oh, hold on. That was the wrong thing. Slideshow. All right. Can you see that? That's
Yep.
good. Okay. So after COVID-19, what did the veterinarians do, and what did the industry do? They relied on the fact that veterinarians were saying that this is a totally veterinary approved process of mass killing. This is Jen Sorensen. She's the communications director for Iowa Select Farms, one of the farms implicated in using VSD to kill their pigs. And she says veterinarians and production well-being of professionals are overseeing the process to ensure accordance with the American Association of Swine Veterinarians and the Veterinary Medical Association. And so we were horrified by this, and many veterinarians were. And we started Veterinarians Against Ventilation Shutdown, and we asked the AVMA to reclassify this as not recommended. More than 2,000 veterinarians have signed on to it. And we actually recently, there was a poll, actually not very recently, maybe it was like a year ago, that was on the Veterinary Information Network. So broad spectrum of veterinarians, and only 1.1% of veterinarians surveyed said that Ventilation Shutdown Plus was an ethical and humane method of depopulation. So the vast majority of veterinarians are on our side on this. But I suffered a lot of backlash and retaliation for this. This is a meme that went around veterinary Facebook groups saying, beware, Crystal Heath is has an agenda that doesn't include anything positive for our profession. She expresses a fondness for the Animal Liberation Front and the Earth Liberation Front, which I didn't even know what those groups were at the time. They're talking about how I was in equestrian groups and 4-H pages, like acting like I was doing so to get information when I'm actually a 4-H'er and equestrian. So they recommended that my colleagues block me. This is a meme made by the vigilant administrators of veterinary Facebook groups. And to this day, I'm still blocked from many veterinary Facebook groups. Glenn Greenwald got the attention of Glenn Greenwald, and he wrote about this backlash that I faced. I was on his show. I thought, this is great exposure for what actually happened. I'll get to share my side of the story. Didn't make a difference. Years later, I am still facing the same backlash and retaliation by the industry for voicing concerns about this and other practices. And so now it's the avian influenza outbreak had infected dairy herds. And all along, the industry and officials were saying, quelling any public concern. Don't worry, the milk is safe. The Biden administration scrambles to reassure Americans as bird flu spreads. And the National Cattlemen's Beef Association said basically that, don't worry, the USDA confirmed there is no threat to human health, and the milk and the meat remain safe to consume. The USDA has confirmed that affected dairy cows do not appear to be transmitting the virus to other cows within the same herd. Oh no, is this going to freeze up again? Oh, let me go back. So only about, and this one says only about 10% of an affected dairy herds seems to get infected with H5N1, and the cows aren't dying. They bounce back to health within a couple of weeks. So I know how the industry works now at this point. I know this is not necessarily true. This is highly suspicious. Oh, I swear this is still not. Okay, so I went to the Central Valley of California to see for myself what is really going on, and very quickly came across piles of dead cows on the side of the road. And this is why it's so important, I think, for all of us to get out there and see things for ourselves. Do not believe what is in the headlines. Do your own research, and by your own research, it doesn't mean go down some influencer's rabbit hole. Like, go out there, talk to real people involved, and go on the ground and see for yourself what is happening in our food system. So my footage got international headlines and forced the dairy industry to change their narrative. They now had to switch their language to, it wasn't just a few cows dying. In fact, so many cows were dying that the rendering trucks were backed up. And this led to a Vanity Fair article where vets were saying how they were being bullied and retaliated against for encouraging testing of these dairies. They were being threatened with being fired if they pushed dairy producers to continue to test. But of course, I faced more backlash for this, which is classic. So this is a dairy industry Facebook page with more than 1 million followers, and they basically say this vegan veterinarian is going around taking pictures of your cows. One person said this vet should have her license revoked. Posting photos like this are a breach of confidentiality. If your medical doctor was doing this, they'd be facing criminal charges. I would hope that a human medical doctor would take pictures of piles of dead human bodies on the side of the road, like, because that would be pretty horrifying. Um, so it's pretty funny. And even some of my veterinarian colleagues were saying that I was a stain on the profession, and they posted that my license should be revoked. So we'll see. It takes the board years in order to inform people of any board complaints. So we'll see if I got any board complaints based on this. But as a shelter veterinarian, I run into situations where people are rescuing animals and they end up with too many animals than they can care for, and it becomes a dire situation. They're trying to solve this houseless animal crisis, and they get in way over their head, and they're often, then charged with animal cruelty, hoarding. Hoarding is a disease that many people are struggling with, and we clasp those people in handcuffs and send them to jail. But what do we do when corporations do this sort of thing? When they take on too many animals that they can't provide veterinary care for, that they can't euthanize in a less cruel way than what they're doing. They get away with it because these are some of the wealthiest families in the world, and they support the industries run by the wealthiest family in the world. So the Mars family, this is your PetSmart, your Banfield, pet food companies. $115 billion this family has. Merck, which is a pharmaceutical company. This is a family that owns Merck. $81 billion they have. Boehringer Ingelheim is owned by the von Baumbach family. $81 billion. Cargill Macmillan, this is the biggest agribusiness company in the world. They profit from feed crops and animal-based protein production. $56 billion they have. They have 21 billionaires in their family. Lactalis, which is another dairy industry family, $43 billion. Chick-fil-A, $33 billion. The Sackler family, more pharmaceutical industry. The Resnicks, who control a lot of agriculture in California, $11.2 billion. So Johnson & Johnson, so these are the wealthiest families in the world, profit from animal agriculture and pharmaceutical industries. So anything that threatens their profits, they are not going to allow. They have the lobbying power to influence policy and government. So we're missing a lot of information because they are so powerful. So this is just one example. Now, avian influenza has infected our cats, and many cats have died because they were infected with avian influenza. One of the first signs that avian influenza was infecting dairies was that the cats were dying after they drank the raw milk. And we're still unsure if maybe cats can spread it to humans. There's so much we don't know about how prevalent it is in our cats, but we do know around 90% of cats die if they're infected from it. So if a cat comes into my clinic and I want to test them for avian influenza, my cost is going to be anywhere from $107 to $213 to test that cat. And so I have to charge the cat's human in order to compensate my clinic for the cost of running that test, interpreting the test, and everything else. So I'm probably going to charge $200 to $400 for that test. Meanwhile, if your dairy cow or your poultry flock is infected and you want to do a test, that cost is going to be around $4 to at most $92 to isolate the virus, which they don't do that. You can get away with doing the $4 test. And the government will reimburse you for the cost of doing that. And I think, why not allow that testing to be more widespread and diagnostics accessible? Because there's so much we aren't learning about the way that this virus is spread because we're not doing enough disease surveillance. in human beings and in our companion animals. So this is an example of some of the reimbursements that these dairies get, up to $2,000 per premises to reimburse them for the cost. And when a cow is infected with avian influenza, there is up to 1 billion virus particles per milliliter of milk. That's enough virus to infect tens of thousands of poultry birds. So imagine a fly landing on a bit of milk, having it stick to their feet and then flying to a poultry facility, or that milk traveling on dust or leaves into the vents of or bird feathers into the vents of a poultry facility. And across California, that's exactly what happens, because this is what the Central Valley of California looks like. It's a patchwork of dairies and poultry facilities. So this dairy was infected at the end. This is Poster Creek Family Dairy, infected at the end of October. And then November 12th, Central Valley Eggs became infected. This is one of the nation's largest cage-free egg facilities. It's like, of course, this is happening. These dairies are infecting these poultry facilities. The industry says, the vast majority of infections are coming from wild birds, but we do know that dairies are spreading this to the poultry facilities as well in a certain number of cases. So what do we get for this? Jennie-O Turkey Store, multi-billion-dollar corporation, $120 million in indemnity payments to cover the loss of their birds. Herbrook Poultry Ranch, which just sold to JBS, $89 million. I think they got a lot more money after that. And then the Trump administration increased the indemnity payments for egg producers from $7 a bird to $17 a bird. And this virus just kind of encourages more consolidation, because if you have a small, Herbrooks is pretty big. They had multiple facilities, but they were all infected, and that really kind of crushed them financially. And they were ripe for the picking for JBS to come in and buy them up. So we're just kind of incentivizing more consolidation and more disease outbreaks with these indemnity payments. Meanwhile, if you want to conscientiously object to these industries, or if you want to buy local humane meat, eggs, milk, whatever, you're still forced to pay the companies with the worst animal welfare practices. This is a dairy industry study. 73% of dairy revenues come from some form of subsidy. So in veterinary medicine, we have two different philosophies. This is the older model, is on the left with the man at the top, and really it should be corporations at the top. And we prioritize the interests of others based on their order of moral concern to us. We prioritize the interests of more charismatic species over the interests of others. But really, One Health teaches us that we're all interconnected. Obviously, if we treat our poultry birds bad, that's going to affect our public health, our food security. They're going to spread this virus to our companion animals. It's going to spread to us. And if we are dependent, as our current food system is dependent on animal-based protein, that then threatens our food security. So how do we increase our food security? We expand our ability to produce protein using non-animal methods. So this is another model of One Health. I envision a future where maximizing access to care, more disease surveillance, less funding going towards propping up billion-dollar corporations, and more of that funding directed at providing diagnostics to all of us, humans, animals. We all deserve access to healthcare. That will help advance science and our understanding of how these diseases spread. And the science shows that if we prioritized and supported animal-free methods of food production, we would save $7.3 trillion globally in health burdens and ecosystem degradation. And these high density livestock operations serve as opportune environments for spillover from wild animals into livestock or as incubators for pandemic influenza strains. Large pig and poultry farms are where the genetic reassortment is needed to source pandemic influenza strains. This is where it most likely will occur. So I do a lot of journalism on the side. My works appeared in the Washington Post. And I also was recently arrested at a ICE protest in June, working as a journalist. The Los Angeles Police Department did not understand the law and did not understand what a journalist is. And I was illegally kettled and handcuffed and brought to jail. And it just goes to show you, like, our law enforcement doesn't understand the law. And so we need to do a better job. And luckily, charges haven't been filed against me. My charge was misdemeanor failure to disperse. I heard no dispersal order. I was happy to leave. I was actually trying to get home when they kettled me. Luckily, the Los Angeles Press Club did sue the LAPD. I'm a member of the Los Angeles Press Club, and they sued the Department of Homeland Security, and they won. So in theory, they are not allowed to brutalize us anymore, but we will see. We have to continue to go out there and protect our First Amendment rights. You can see our press at ourhonor.org/press. This is the Vanity Fair article, and it just shows how in June of last year, this is 2024, Eric Diebel of the USDA told scientific experts on a private phone call, in the words of the secretary, it's just going to burn itself out. And no, it has not burnt itself out. This is an article that I wrote that appeared in Time magazine with co-author Jean Bauer. And it says, every few years, another major crisis arises in the animal-based protein industry. And each time it happens, the sector seems bewildered and caught yet again completely off guard. This just came out in ProPublica, a wonderful article about how this virus is likely being spread on the wind. And that's something that the USDA has been ignoring. So check it out. You can also check out our live streams where we discuss these issues. All Beings Considered and FOIA Friday. There's the QR code to join those. And if you're interested in all of the FOIA documents, this is Freedom of Information Act requests that we do tons of these, and we've gathered some really interesting information that I have not had the chance to go through in depth. You can check out that link there. And if you're ever interested in volunteering, we always love volunteers. If you can write, if you can do social media, if you want to edit, give feedback, if you want to manage a project, if you want to go out there and look at these facilities for yourself, do not trespass. We do not advocate you stay on public roads. Do not harass people. Just document from the roads. If you're asked to leave, leave. Do not be a bother. Do not trespass. But I think we definitely need more people out there looking for themselves at how our food is being produced. And you can always email me at cheath@ourhonor.org. And with that, I'm also happy to take any questions. There's all the social media you can follow me at as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm looking at everyone in the chat, and that was something. Okay, thank you. Where to begin?
Sorry, it's a lot.
No, it's fantastic. It's fantastic. So, we do not have enough time. Dag nabbit. Let's see. I mean, there's so many little questions bubbling just from everything that you brought up, but a couple things like just that stood out in the chat while you were talking, and that I hear, of course, all the time, which is, this is why factory farms are the problem. Small, local, organic family farms. Okay. Now, I just want to dispel that myth right now, because that's often the conclusion that people come to now. Animal ag doesn't really mind that we're saying that it's factory farms that are the problem. Of course,
Yeah.
most of them are industrial. This is the corporations and the industrialization of animal exploitation and all that. And of course, we are, with our tax dollars, regardless of whether we're vegan or not, our tax dollars are paying
Mhm.
for this
Yeah.
insane industry. But I just want to be clear for anyone watching that, like, for instance, you brought it up too, cage-free facilities. So
Yeah.
all this advocacy and all these years, all this money being put into cage-free campaigns, when even if you're just talking about pandemic threat, it does nothing to mitigate the pandemic threat and this bird
Mm-mm.
flu virus, right? So,
Yeah.
and of course, a lot of advocates are talking about how it's really not that much friendlier. It's not really much less cruel than cage facilities. So there's a lot
Yeah.
of vegetarians watching this, that it says this is the egg industry and the dairy industry just as much as the meat industry. That was
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually just went to a very famous regenerative farm in the South. I don't want to name names, but it's the one that Joe Rogan raves about. And saw for myself. And on one hand, I'm like, I talked to the patriarch there, and it's like we're kind of on the same side because he's fighting the industry too.
mm,
And he actually said he had a bird flu scare at his birds are outside, and his birds actually they sent them in to be tested, and they had antibodies to the virus. And I'm like, well, that's similar to sanctuaries. We see on sanctuaries birds get sick,
mhm.
and they're able to save them because they're provided more individual care. So he didn't have to mass exterminate his birds. His theory for why that is I don't agree with, but but we also see these backyard flocks
Mhm.
who get sick and have to be exterminated. So it's not completely safe. And we just do not have the land, and there's still the virus potential to produce the amount of animal protein needed with that model.
Right.
And I still saw some welfare concerns associated with the way that he was producing animals. And he's got chickens and he's got pigs and he's got cows. And I'm like, he doesn't do dairy, so there's that. But like pigs and avian flu, like that's a big concern. They're a mixing vessel. They're going to help the virus mutate and spread to humans. So I is there any disease surveillance of these pigs? I wonder. Like I would love to test them to see
Yeah.
what's going on there. So yeah, I know any exploitation of animals is a risk, and we're seeing a lot of these small backyard facilities get infected too. So
Exactly. And I love your framing of it as a conscientious objector, not, and
yeah.
not for me, not just against animal-based protein production, but against the exploitation of animals. I mean, our mindset that we think we have a right to use and exploit animals and enslave them and oppress them is what's
Yeah.
led to this entire system. So anyway,
Anytime we have this idea that like some are more important than others,
there you go.
then we run
Hierarchy.
into problems. The
Yep.
only people who benefit are the ones at the very top. The Cargills benefit from that.
Yes.
Anytime, and this is so true in the veterinary field too. It's like the people in charge of the AVMA are more important than little Crystal veterinarian. And it's like, does that benefit the veterinary profession at all? No, because we're all at risk of being ostracized and smeared. And this is the same thing. If you're an activist, this is a huge problem in activist circles as well. I've been bullied, retaliated against, and ostracized by animal activist groups as well for voicing concerns about men in power.
Mhm.
And that same philosophy of some people are more important than others that exists in activism, like that person's a hero and they are more important than the lowly activist who isn't a hero. It leads to the same problems.
Right. It's just these hierarchy
Mhm.
systems. Um, yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh, wrote all these notes. So, um, oh, and also this issue of, can you talk a little bit about, because of course we know, like, the things that the talking points that we need to get across to the public, like they should be angry at this industry, not at those, of course, who are just simply telling the truth and exposing what's happening, but not just the cruelty, of course, and that they're putting us all at risk for another pandemic. They are prioritizing their profits over putting the entire world at risk for another pandemic, which has been said, if it does happen, which it's sounding like it's inevitable, up
Yeah.
to 10 times, if not worse than COVID, and up to 50% mortality rate. So animal ag, the entire industry, is basically wanting to shut all of us up to allow their system to continue and to keep putting us all at risk. So these are things that we can get the public on board about. Like, be angry at these industries that are trying to make everybody quiet about the truth of this huge threat, and not just the killing, the mass killing, but then you have the lies, the marketing lies, and trying to convince all of us that it's all humane, and just as long as it says cage free or free range or small family farm, it's okay. So getting the public on our side, like, these industries are lying to us. They're tormenting animals behind the scenes. They're creating laws to shut us up, these ag gag laws. Can we just talk about that, or have you talk a little bit about that, Crystal, and the intimidation that you faced even as a veterinarian within the AVMA?
Yeah. I mean, it's so frustrating, but I think a lot of activist messaging in the past has been very harmful because they present it as like, you have a choice and you can stop paying for this.
That's not
And
going to do it.
that's not true, because the industry, we need to show the world that the industry has denied us a choice.
Right.
We are denied food that aligns with our values. We are denied healthy food. 95% of us are fiber deficient. We're taught these thought stopping cliches, and we're forced to pay the companies with the lowest animal welfare practices. And I talking to this regenerative farmer guy, he was like, I'm like, what's your answer? How are we going to change this? How are we going to stop the worst practices? And he thought that legislation wasn't the answer. It's all coming down to consumer choice. And no, that's not how we change things. We're not going to be able to change things just by appealing to individual consumer habits. That's never been the answer. Sure, so a certain percentage of us will conscientiously object to this industry, but we also have to get active and change policy and enforce animal welfare laws and make it very difficult for the industry to continue committing corporate crimes against animals, because that's what's happening now. And this is where every shelter veterinarian, instead of going after the old lady who's hoarding animals because she got in over her head with rescuing, we can, especially in California, we have the authority to prosecute these industrial ag facilities for breaking the law. And I have filmed more than 100 dairies in California, across the world, across the country. And there are still calves being confined in crates smaller than 42 square feet because they're not being raised for veal. They're being raised as replacement heifers and for beef. This is it, may be okay with Prop 12 because they're not veal calves, but it is not in alignment with California Penal Code 597T, which says that you need to provide animals with adequate exercise. All animal shelters can file a criminal complaint and start potentially prosecuting these places, but we're not. We just don't feel like we can do that because it hasn't been done before. But there are so many opportunities here to start litigating, and I have started filing some complaints against these dairies. I filed water board complaints and animal cruelty complaints against some of the dairies that I found. It hasn't led to anything, but that's part of the story too. It's like, this is all I've done and it hasn't led to anything. And so now what do we do next? How do we stop this? And I think the more people realize what's happening, the more we'll dismantle consumer trust and confidence in this industry, because the industry relies on veterinarians to foster that social license to operate. They say we need to protect our social license to operate, and they use veterinarians to do that. And if we also have the power to take away, revoke their social license to operate. So that's what Our Honor is doing. And that's why I think we need to focus our efforts on empowering veterinarians to be the ones to solve that problem. We're told to, small animal vets need to stay in our lane, and we can't criticize what happens in food animal because we have to let our food animal veterinary colleagues take care of that. But they're only 6% of the profession. And they're good people who have been indoctrinated into a belief system that this is necessary, that they are doing the best they can under this current system. They are not bad people, but they need our help to start addressing some of these concerns, because nobody is happy with the way things are going except for the Cargills and the Boehringer Ingelheims and the Mercks. Like they're the ones who's happy with this. The rest of us are not.
But the AVMA
Yeah.
helps to legitimize animal ag, right?
Mhm.
And so therefore you have all these lovely young veterinarians who go in there, they go into it because they love animals. And then
Yeah.
they too are conditioned. No, cats and dogs, these are the ones we save. These are the ones we really care about. But farmed animals, those are property. Those are I mean, the brainwashing
Yeah.
that then happens. And then, of course, like what happened to you, they're all intimidated and ostracized
Mhm.
and then threatened with getting kicked out of the AVMA, which is, can you explain, isn't that the biggest?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm still not kicked out of the AVMA. I'm still a member. The
Oh,
vast majority of like my colleagues who are really aligned with me though, they're like, this is why I'm not an AVMA member. I don't want to give them $1. And I'm
yeah.
like, then you don't have a voice. Then you can't make a change. You can't comment on the guidelines for depopulation. You can't sit on committees. And so this is where we need to engage instead of disengage and not be involved. This is one of the things that's harmed activists is we don't go to zoos, we don't go to regenerative farms, we don't participate in these ag industry conferences and be part of the conversation and see things for ourselves.
That's what
And
we
we're
tried to do,
left,
but we tried to get in and we did, and we participated
yeah,
in questions, and then they try to shut you down. But we
but
just keep going.
keep going because
Yeah,
those in power depend on the fact that the vast majority of people, when they're pushed and they're questioned or they're silenced, will fold.
exactly.
If they face social ostracization, they will just fold and go along.
Right,
The vast majority of people just like, I don't want to deal with this drama. This is too much drama for me.
right.
And they just get, stop. And the worst thing I think anybody can do is take away your voice and make you feel like you can't share your story. And I've felt that way in animal activist communities and groups and in the veterinary profession. And that is one thing I will fight against. Everybody deserves the right to say their perspective and say their story and tell their story. And let's hash it out. Don't silence people. Don't accuse people of infighting or gossiping or like
Right.
these are all the toxic language that is
That's
used
usually,
to control
oh, you're
people.
infighting to shut you up. Oh,
Mhm.
we can't have any
Exactly.
disagreements to shut you up. No, we're having
Uh-huh.
a
Mm-mm.
conversation that's very important to have. Yes. And
And most people, like good
but
people, want to be polite and
yes,
respectful. And you can be polite and respectful,
can exactly.
but you can also continue to push back and not be afraid. But they make you feel like, oh, I I must have said something bad. I'm not skillful enough in the way I'm communicating about this. I must have done something wrong. If I said it the right way, I wouldn't have faced this backlash and people wouldn't be so angry at me. Don't don't doubt yourself. Keep going. Like keep trying. I think it's so important. That's the number one thing we need to do. And I think women, especially right now, are finding their voice. And I'm really happy about that.
Yes. Thank you, Crystal. I
Yeah,
could talk to you for another hour.
I
I wish
know.
I could, and I know Lisa's coming in because we're looking at the clock and we've gone over the time. Darn it. But Crystal, your website, your organization. So what can people do?
Go to ouronor.org, follow our newsletter if you want to get involved and volunteer. Email me, cheath@ouronor.org. I put a link in the chat, and I didn't share a lot of the gruesome photos. If you want to look at those, I have folders of photos that are in that link that I shared in the chat. So you can view my photo if you are watching this online and you don't have access to the link, email me. I can send you the photos. I also do photojournalism for We Animals, so a lot of my new photos will appear on We Animals as well.
Wonderful.
Fantastic. Well, we are incredibly grateful to you for sharing your wisdom and knowledge, and also inspiring other activists to speak out and to not be afraid that the knowledge is more important than the fear that we have. And we will find support. We support you in Defense of Animals. We really support your
Thank
work.
you.
We're so delighted that you're here. There are many questions, and what we could do is share some of them later. Lia may do a blog that could possibly answer some of these questions
Yeah,
for
I'd
everyone.
love to.
So
Yeah.
we'll be in
Yeah.
touch. We do want
Yeah.
to hear everyone's questions, and thank you so much for putting them in the chat and in the Q&A, and we can address them through.
And also feel free to, once this video goes up, leave comments and put your questions in the comments on the video that
Yeah.
will up on YouTube. And then, yeah, we can continue the conversation there.
Yeah, I'll try to go on there and say some more in
Yeah,
the
great.
YouTube.
Great. Okay. Thank you,
Thank you
Crystal.
so much for joining us for this World Vegan Month program, and to both of you for your incredible work to help farm animals. We really